Good morning. I'm Fred Bronstein, Dean of the Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to the Next Normal Ideas for the Future. We're delighted to have you with us today for this important conversation. Before we begin, I want to briefly take a step back and tell you how we got here. In 2015, the Peabody Institute began a series of Dean Symposiums, bringing in artists, administrators, and thought leaders from across the performing arts for the specific purpose of opening our collective eyes to the rapid changes across our field, while searching for models of how we might orient our students to be best prepared to meet those challenges as 21st century artists. This was all a precursor of sorts to steps we would then take to formulate the breakthrough curriculum launched since that time, Launchpad, our innovative career and life design space, and other initiatives designed to expand the mindset of our students to the possibilities surrounding careers today and to how our world was changing. So it wasn't a stretch when COVID hit that Peabody was eager to convene conversations across the industry as to what the impact would be for the performing arts, both short-term and long-term, and consequently how we and other professional schools might need to adapt to better prepare artists to thrive. One of the most important things a major university can do is be a convener of conversations, of ideas, to provide a forum for imagining and grappling with the future. This is a role that Johns Hopkins University plays in a number of fields, and for me, why Peabody's hosting of the Next Normal series is important. And indeed, although these Next Normal events began in reaction to and as an outgrowth of the COVID pandemic, the issues we're discussing transcend the issues raised through COVID. This series has now engaged more than 1,500 participants in solutions-focused exploration of the long-term challenges facing the performing arts industry and the potential for a better path forward. Our initial convening in February of 2021 was focused on the immediate impact of COVID, as well as what the longer-term impact might look like. What that conversation revealed was that while the impact of COVID was both immediate and devastating to the performing arts, the longer-term issues were ones that in truth predated COVID and had been with us for a long time, only to be accelerated by the pandemic. There were two overarching themes that arose during the course of that first event. The first was, how could we create more flexible and adaptable arts institutions, as well as more flexible and adaptable artists, capable of change and creative thinking in order to meet an ever-evolving future, whether driven by a pandemic, technology, economic, or other forces. We had a robust conversation about these issues at our Next Normal Symposium this past November. Those conversations continue. The other major takeaway reflected the growing sense of urgency around the need for the performing arts, especially the classical arts, to come to terms with our individual, institutional, and collective history around racism and exclusion, and the lack of diversity within our field's professional ranks and audiences. Of course, this also paralleled the growing national urgency around race that followed the murder of George Floyd and other similar crimes against Black Americans. As I noted earlier, this is not a new issue for our field, but it is an existential one. Existential because it goes to the core of our field being able to prosper in the future. Fighting racism and seeking diversity, equity, and inclusion are the right things to do, and they will enhance our excellence. But they're also essential to the development of future audiences in a rapidly diversifying and increasingly multicultural society. And that brings us to the Next Normal Ideas for the Future, today's symposium that will examine racial equity and inclusion in the performing arts. We've brought together for this purpose today a wonderfully talented array of individual artists and administrators as presenters and panelists from across the performing arts for a deep conversation as well as uplifting examples of important work ongoing today. And I'm incredibly grateful to those participating who I know will make this a vibrant conversation. There's one more thing that I think is important to say. When we consider the history and lack of diversity and inclusion, especially in the classical arts, I'm reminded of how important it is to approach these issues with humility, to learn from those that have something to teach us. In our own work here at Peabody, and no doubt true of other institutions represented here today, we're focused on anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion as a pillar of our strategic direction, and that work goes across areas: recruiting, culture, programming, and curriculum. While today we're pleased to be a convener and participant in this important conversation, we're most of all eager to be here learning along with all our colleagues. And I'm looking forward to it and hope you are as well. Have a great day, and thank you again for joining us. And now it's my pleasure to introduce my co-moderator for today's panel, Alicia Lee. Alicia is current and the first president, actually, of the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund, which is a grant maker, a local grant maker, which is now investing $12 million annually into the city's youth serving sector. She is a current faculty member of the Peabody's Breakthrough Curriculum, and by the way, she's also a Peabody alum. And she is a national thought leader on racial justice in arts education and formerly led the Fine Arts Education Office at the Maryland State Department of Education. So Alicia, it's great to have you as a partner today. Thanks.
Good morning, Fred. Yeah, I'm so glad to be here. This is really exciting to have this conversation at Peabody. It feels like such a great moment. And so we're just thanking you for your leadership and making this space available. I'd like to just talk a little bit for a moment before we introduce the first presentation, just to set the tone and continue to set the tone for today's event. We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones, we are the ones, we've been waiting. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. So that wonderful song is from one of my musical heroes, Sweet Honey in the Rock. And I am so excited to just open the space with music and singing, something that is a part of my identity, being a musician, and to be able to talk today about how we can bring a more humanistic approach to the performing arts sector. I am joining you from my home in Baltimore City, which is on the ancestral lands of the Piscataway. I use she and her pronouns. And I'm excited that today we're going to be discussing the role of the arts and the role of the arts education sector in advancing racial equity and preparing us all for a liberated world, a world that we've never seen. In my work with the young people of Sister Cities Girl Choir, the L System-inspired program that I founded 10 years ago, or working with arts education institutions all across the country, or in my work here at Peabody with the students through the Breakthrough Curriculum, where our students at Peabody are given that liminal space to reimagine their careers and artistic impact. I see folks of all ages yearning and striving to understand the artist and creative's role in the work of liberation. And for me, when I think of the intersection of decolonization and arts learning and arts making, which is what we'll be exploring today, I offer today and to all of the folks that are under in my influence that the artistic processes of create, connect, respond, and present, that they develop habits of mind like being reflective, or just the efficacy to know that you can create something from nothing. An empty room or a blank canvas can be transformed under your control. That those skills, right, they create those habits of mind that are mission critical for the work of justice. And so Lucille Clifton, one of my favorite poets, and I hope yours, reminds us that we cannot create what we can't imagine. So it's very powerful to remember that the power of imagination and creativity, you know, the thing that got us all started being artists or arts administrators or deans, yes, those are the fundamental building blocks of revolution and community transformation, the fundamental building blocks of justice. Even Bloom's taxonomy tells us that the highest order of thinking is creation. So with all of that in mind, I just remind us as we begin the day to remind us that we are creators. We are music makers. We are dreamers of dreams. And today, as we center the voices of Black and Brown people throughout this day-long discussion about race and inclusion and diversity and equity and access, my hope is that we all connect all of these assets that we have developed as a community of music makers and actors and dancers and arts administrators and deans and presidents, as builders and weavers, as dreamers of dreams, and that we use those skills to activate. And so now it is my great pleasure to introduce our first presentation of the day. Garrett Mcqueen, bassoonist, conductor, producer, and co-host of the Triloquy podcast, hint, hint, my favorite podcast. And he will be presenting on decolonizing classical music.